everyone, it's Jen again. So this week it's weird because I feel like I didn't get a lot done every day, but when I looked over like what I accomplished over the course of the week, it was actually a good amount of stuff that I got figured out. So I'm pretty happy with my progress this week. I've been diving into working on my new project, Esper X Guide, and it's going to be a fantasy sci-fi visual novel RPG memory card game dungeon exploration and life sim hybrid. Sounds like a lot of things. There's a lot of concepts that are like crammed in there, but I feel like once it's all put together, it will be cohesive enough that it won't feel like a whole bunch of separate elements going on at once. One of the things I was thinking about as I've been like approaching this project, and I guess having the freedom to just kind of be starting at the beginning, it's good for me to have some things, it's like some learning goals to focus on. I always like to try some new things out whenever I am coming up with a new game idea because it makes the whole development more exciting and interesting for me. So with Arcane Dice Wars, a large part of the learning process or like the novelty was like the battle system and implementing kind of I guess improving my exploration movement system, and I'm going to be doing both of those things again with this new game. Although I'm planning on having the battles be pretty sparse since it is going to be like a card memory game. I think it'll be tedious to have too much of that be like the core gameplay, but I am going to focus on developing that first because I think when it comes to visual novels or visual novel hybrids, when you want to make something that's like a gameplay mechanic inside that visual novel framework, the tendency is to kind of like write the novel and then find a place to like insert a mini game to break up the monotony of the game. But a lot of times that ends up feeling kind of like forced and out of place. So I prefer to have like the gameplay mechanics figured out first and then kind of build the story and the story structures around having that gameplay in the core part of the game, so that it doesn't feel like just some kind of like side mini game that feels disconnected from the rest of the story structure. So a lot of like the companion development and the world building in Arcane Dice Wars revolved completely around the battle system because that's what I created first, and the same is going to be for Esper X Guide. Most of like the world building and the companion system and the stat growth and everything tied to the bonding with the companion characters is all tied to like combat, even though combat is going to be a lot more sparse in this game as opposed to Arcane Dice Wars, where there was some grinding for increasing loyalty and gathering materials. In this game, those elements are going to be separate, so you're going to have like battles, maybe just a handful of battles per dungeon, and then there's going to be a set number of encounters, and all the enemies are going to be unique. So they're going to be like variants of each other, but they're going to have unique stats and unique strategies that you have to use to like overcome them. So the majority of the bonding and the leveling up is going to be done in a separate portion of the game, which is going to be kind of like the life simulator part, where the player is going to choose like what activities you want to do for the day to increase growth and increase bonding, and hopefully that'll give like the player a lot of like choices on how they want to build their characters and build their relationships without having to do a lot of like grindy combat, especially with the combat is going to be something that's going to have to require a lot of attention. It's not going to be like, oh, I can just kind of spam this button over and over again. Like, it's going to require some focus. So I don't want to make the player have to like spend a lot of time in that like really focused mindset. I want the majority of the game to be like pretty like smooth and easygoing and relaxing, and then you're just gonna have a few moments of, you know, like maybe I'm thinking like 3 to 5 battles per dungeon, where you're going to be having to pay attention to the cards and try to memorize their placement and stuff like that. So we'll see how it goes. I still have to play test and develop like the combat system a little bit more, because I have kind of changed my approach from like the original sort of like card system that I was starting to develop back in like the beginning of the year, once I had more time to like think about it. So I'm gonna think about it a little bit more. I've been sketching out how I want the combat phases to work and how the combat animation and the layout will look, but I decided to switch my focus over to the dungeon exploration and improving that and making that a little bit more complicated and developed since Arcane Dice Wars. And while I'm doing that, it gives me more time to like kind of think about the combat system and how I want to approach that. And sometimes I just need time to think about something, like whether it's like going on my walks with my dog or cooking. I'm thinking about these things as I'm doing like these menial tasks throughout the day. And there's something right now that feels like not quite right, so I'm not like ready to dive into the combat yet. Like there still seems to be something that's kind of like not quite connecting confidently in my brain, and then once I have that eureka moment, then I will dive into that. So that is still going to be my like major priority, but in the meantime I'm working on a couple of my other learning goals, which was working with vector shapes in order to create a cleaner GUI, and going forward with a little more intentionality with the dungeon exploration and the backgrounds that will be used for that. But I'm feeling pretty confident, like after sort of like writing out my ideas, that is going to work along with like the way that I want to build these composite backgrounds. But I still have to program it, so that will be probably this upcoming week. I will be playing around with that, as well as working on my combat system once that kind of moment strikes me. So I've already got the GUI for the cards for the combat, and I think I've got most of the combat like menu items and stuff figured out, and as well as like an idea of how I want to place the sprites and how I want to do the sprite animations. So I will probably go ahead and start working on like the enemy and player sprite, as well as like just some keyframe poses that I'll be able to use to kind of like test the animation and the battle sequences to make sure that like it kind of flows the way that I want it to. And then by the time I figure out that part, I will be looking at the card arrangements and how those are placed on the screen, and that will give me more of an idea of like how I want to go forward with the combat card element. I think right now what it's going to be is it's going to be the cards divided into 2 major typings, being the attack type cards and the support type cards, and the player will choose if they want to pursue like an attack or support at the beginning of their turn, and then the cards will be laid out face down, and any cards that are turned over that are attack cards can be used if you selected attack, and support if you selected support. And you'll be able to use 4 cards per turn. Using each card will be an additional like attack or support technique that will build upon each other. So the longer the chain, like the more effective each one of those attacks that you take, it will kind of build on itself. So there will be motivation for the player to try to remember or to possibly defer on using like attack cards until they have until they know like 4 placements of 4 attack cards to use them in sequence. I'm thinking that it's going to be kind of like a penetration effect where it's going to have a higher penetration value of the enemies, like defenses, the higher the combination of cards that you use. And I'm thinking like the animations will be kind of like a Rekka for anybody who's familiar with like fighting games. So that will be a little bit of a visual reward, as well as like gameplay mechanics reward, is just to be able to kind of see the attack look cooler as it builds up. Those are my thoughts right now. I just had a bunch of footage of random stuff that I'm working on. And I'll show a little bit of like these composite backgrounds that I'm talking about. Here you can see the template that I was using for my composite background, where I have a very simple stylized layout for the perspective of the dungeon, along with these kind of guideline markers to separate what would be the room that the player currently is standing in, and this smaller box would be like representative of the room that is adjacent that they are facing. I didn't want to create all the combinations of possible rooms that they could be adjacent to that room, so we're just going to go off into the black void of dark shadows, so that you can't see that far in advance. What that looks like with the rendered backgrounds is these different parts here, where I've got these walls. I've got this base, which is just like the ceiling and the floor, which is always going to be shown. And then I've got a different, some different combination of walls. So we've got our left wall that's going off into the distance, as well as our right wall. And then we've also got partial walls. So this would be like if the player could go forward or to their right or left, they would be able to see this. And then the partial walls would be like if the room adjacent to them, instead of only being able to go straight. Oh wait, it was on the partial walls. Sorry. The full walls would be if they could only go straight. That's what I was trying to say. So I can't go left or right, I can only go straight. Partial walls would be like if I could go straight or if I could go right, it would be like this combination. And then I also have, for seeing in the distance, if I were to be able to go straight into the next room, but then there was a dead end there, you would see that dead end wall there. Or if I could go straight into the next room and I could keep going straight after that, it would go off into the dark shadowy void. And then these are if I would be able to go left and right in the next adjacent room. These other walls here, whoops, let me turn off the full walls. This would be if I went ahead and went into that dead end. This would be if I turned while I was at the dead end, I guess. Well, no, this would be if I turned if I was at the dead end. And I turned in either direction, because that would be the dead end wall. This would be if I was like going down the straight tunnel. If I was going down the straight tunnel and then I turned to the wall, then you would see that. And using the combination of these different parts, I think I calculated that would be about like 40 different variations that should cover all the possibilities of the room that the player is currently in and then the adjacent room that they're facing. And all these parts ended up being just these 13 pieces, as opposed to making 40 separate rooms that were all very similar. I also have the GUI in here. So this is going to be the movement wheel. The player is going to have the option to just look forward, and then if they click in the direction that they're looking, they will move forward one tile. And then if they were to press like west, east, or south, it would change the direction that they're facing, and then the south would be orientated at the top, and then if you hit south again, then you would move south. But the view would change, so every location is going to have 4 backgrounds that it will refer to, depending on which direction that the player is facing. But the moving, as far as the location, will be pretty much the same as it was in Arcane Dice Wars. I'm pretty happy with how the GUI in general looks. I was mainly making the shapes in Inkscape. It gave me a lot of freedom to kind of tweak all the paths and work with all the different points to make like minor adjustments. So that level of control felt very good, and it felt like a bonus from just working in Photoshop. Then as far as like working with like the colors, I did go back into Photoshop to do that because I like having the control of all the different layer effects, to kind of tweak like the values to be just the right amount of contrast, and kind of like hue saturation that I want it to be. I like the options that I have in Photoshop. I tend to do that even with like Procreate. I draw in color in Procreate, but then I bring all my files into Photoshop to do like those final tweaks. I'd like to find a way to kind of wean myself out of Photoshop though. So I started looking into possibly Clip Studio Paint. We'll see. But that is my week in a nutshell, and I had a lot of fun, and it went by very quickly. The time went by so fast. It was a little bit scary, actually. Like I said, I didn't really feel like I got too much done because time was going by so fast, but like looking over what I accomplished, I think I did actually accomplish a lot, as well as just like kind of incorporating some new techniques as I'm starting this new game. And yeah, hope you have a good week going forward. I'm looking forward to it. And as always, if you're working on something, don't forget to enjoy the process. Bye.